On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country and across the world. We have plenty coming up today. I am joined by a host of top-class guests to talk about the state of Parliament. Do you trust your MP to deliver on the issues that matter most to you in light of this week's revelations? But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here is Olivia Guthrie.
Alistair, thank you. It is 12 o'clock. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB newsroom. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is calling for radical reform after a series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations involving MPs in Parliament. Writing in The Observer, Sir Lindsay says he wants to make the House a safe and inclusive place to work. He believes working practices need to be overhauled, including stopping MPs from directly employing their own staff. The statement comes after MP Neil Parish resigned after being caught watching pornography in the Commons. Chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, Caroline Noakes, told GB News reform is overdue.
If somebody had been watching pornography on the checkout in Tesco's or in any other workplace, they'd have been out the door that afternoon. And that's the significant difference, and where so many of us felt let down over the course of the past few days, is that there wasn't that swift mechanism that could work. There wasn't the ability to say, well, look, here's a policy. It's in contravention of the policy. Then you can take all of the personalities out of it if something is in contravention of a clearly stated policy. And a lot of us have been calling for that for a long time.
Tory party chairman Oliver Dowden says the Conservative Party will make sure its candidate list becomes more equal. He told the Sunday Telegraph it should reflect the fact that half the population are women. Around a quarter of Tory candidates at the 2019 election were women, but Labour managed more than half. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries says ensuring a majority of women in Parliament could help tackle Westminster sleaze. The Pope has condemned Russia's attack on the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, describing it as being barbarously bombarded and destroyed. He's urged Moscow to establish a humanitarian corridor to evacuate those sheltering still inside the Azovstal steel plant. Ukraine's military says 20 civilians have managed to leave the plant so far. Russia says that number is as high as 46. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky claims Russia has lost more than 23,000 soldiers so far in its invasion.
All the leaders of the free world know what Russia has done to Mariupol, and there will be responsibility for this, for Russia. Many of the world leaders are trying to help save our heroic defenders of the city. This was discussed in great detail with the UN Secretary-General during his visit to Kyiv. We're doing everything to ensure that the evacuation mission from Mariupol does get carried out.
Well, the US Speaker of the House has met with President Zelensky in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Nancy Pelosi told the Ukrainian leader that his fight is a fight for everyone. She also said the US is committed to the long haul and stands firmly with Ukraine as it battles what she calls Putin's diabolic invasion. Angelina Jolie's visit to Lviv in Ukraine has been interrupted as air raid sirens warned people to take shelter from a Russian attack. The Hollywood actress had been visiting displaced children at a railway station as a special envoy for the United Nations Refugee Agency. She was seen rushing out of the station and into a waiting car. Previously, she said she wants to do everything possible to ensure the protection and basic human rights of refugees in the region. Hundreds of people on board multiple small boats have been intercepted in the English Channel by UK authorities this morning. That's GBNews can confirm that as an exclusive. It follows 11 days in which no small boats made it into UK waters. Since first light, at least 7 vessels have been spotted and intercepted. At least 230 people have now been taken to the UK Border Force's processing centre in Dover. The Business Secretary has written to North Sea oil and gas firms asking them to come up with a plan to increase domestic production. Kwasi Kwarteng says the industry must invest in homegrown energy production to boost the British economy and bring down consumer bills in the long term. He said firms must also set out plans for investment in clean energy ahead of a meeting in the coming weeks. COVID guidance in Scotland is changing from today. Those with the virus will no longer need to self-isolate, but will still be advised to stay at home. Contact tracing has also come to an end as case numbers continue to fall. The number of COVID infections has dropped for the 5th successive week, with about 1 in 25 people having the virus. The Prince of Wales has called for the nation's dwindling historic natural habitats to be renewed. It's as he unveiled a collection of 70 ancient woodlands and 70 trees dedicated to the Queen to mark her Platinum Jubilee. Prince Charles says these precious assets need to be preserved for future generations.
If we are to create the ancient trees of the future, we must plant more trees in hedgerows, in fields, churchyards and avenues.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Alistair.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed. If, like me, you care about our democracy, you may shed a tear today. From the almost ridiculous story of an MP Googling tractors only to end up on a porn site that he then revisited and resigning, to 1 in 10 MPs facing allegations of sexual misconduct, to electoral pacts, stitch-ups, to get us to vote for the opposition candidate best positioned to defeat the Tories, whatever their party or policies, it's all pretty tragic. Democracy hits rock bottom in 2 ways. There are fiddled democracies where the winner gets over 90%, like Russia or Belarus, to what we may face later this month, when many of you may just shrug and not bother to turn up and vote. By any measure, it's an extraordinary story. A Conservative MP, Neil Parish, was spotted by 2 fellow Tory MPs, both of them women, looking at pornography on his mobile phone, once in the chamber of the House of Commons and on another occasion at a committee meeting. Initially, it seemed that he'd try and face it down, but yesterday afternoon he announced he was resigning as an MP. He was contrite, apologetic, humbled and destroyed. But what does it actually tell us about the state of Parliament and parliamentarians? I ask that because it also comes at a time when it's been widely reported that more than 50 MPs could face allegations of sexual misconduct. That total is said to include cabinet ministers and Labour frontbenchers. Has Parliament become a toxic place of work for women? Has behaviour that decades ago might have been dismissed or reluctantly accepted now become intolerable? We have top guests on the programme to discuss that. Eleanor Goodman, who was Channel 4 News' political editor and before that with the FT. Barbara Follett, who was one of the groundbreakers in trying to get more women into Parliament. And my friend and fellow GB News presenter, Deanna Davidson. She's the Conservative Member of Parliament for Bishop Auckland. Also, another extraordinary story. The government's decision in the early months of the pandemic to move hospital patients into care homes has been held to be, and I quote, unlawful. It's a personal triumph for the two women who both lost their fathers to COVID. But what does it mean for the government, who may now face a flood of actions for damages? I'll be talking to a top barrister and the chair of the National Care Association. And as always, we genuinely want to hear your thoughts on those subjects and any others, especially if you lost a loved one in the care home crisis and feel that you may have a case for damages in the light of that court judgment. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews, or you can tweet us, or me, or you can go onto Facebook. So let's start with my good friend Deanna Davison, who's just finished her own show, got out, stretched her legs and come straight back in here, and very welcome. We talked a little bit about it at the end of your programme, but first things first, party hat firmly on. He's eventually gone. Should he have gone sooner? Should the party have got rid of him sooner?
I think the whole thing should have been handled much quicker. One would have hoped that the whips, who I'm pretty sure knew who it was right from the get-go, could have removed the whip sooner, referred it to investigation sooner, and had the whole process carried out as properly and swiftly as possible.
Fascinating twist to all of that, and my other guests may come in on it. But there was a rumour circulating for 2 days that it was somebody else.
There was.
Who turns out to be entirely innocent.
Absolutely.
That is outrageous.
Well, so many of us in politics do unfortunately become the victim of anonymous briefings, much of which turns out to be nonsense. I've been subject to it myself, but thankfully never on any allegation as serious as this. And it's really hard, not just on you, on your team, on your family, but on your constituents as well, who suddenly get this different view of you, like, oh, are they guilty, are they not? Yeah. So absolutely, it should have been tackled much more swiftly, sent through the appropriate procedures. Yeah. And for what it's worth, I think Neil was absolutely right to resign on this. He was bang to rights.
You catalogued a whole range of things that people had a go at you for in a piece in the Daily Express a few days ago. But interestingly, that was sparked not by Parish or pornography, but by Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, and whether or not she flashed her legs to try and put the Prime Minister off and what have you. In a sense, I raise that because if there is a problem, it's not just a Tory problem.
No, well, you're right. Well, you'll notice I wear trousers because I wouldn't possibly want to distract and
bother boots,
exactly.
Just in case anyone crosses
if you
the line.
can't see them, there they are. No, I mean, it is an issue that I think women in many walks of life, but particularly in public life, do face. Any politician is scrutinised for a whole range of things, but I think when you're a woman, there's this added layer. You know, people talk about what you're wearing, what your tone of voice is like, whether your voice is too high-pitched, whether it's too squeaky, the intention behind what you're doing. So when I go on media, I'm always, deemed to be attention-seeking and just in it for self-publicity, when actually that's not what it's about at all. It's about communicating messaging. It's about helping add to the debate. Men don't tend to get that same level of criticism. And I must admit, it's blooming draining, Alistair. It really is.
The Rayner case also raises something beyond sexism, and that's about straightforward integrity and honesty. And David Lammy was on another TV station this morning saying, yeah, we got it wrong, we didn't tell the truth initially, and now we've clarified that. Starmer for a long time said there was no party in Durham, then there was a party in Durham, and Angie wasn't there, and yes, she was there. I mean, I kind of think that folk out there might be slightly more worried about politicians not telling the truth, as opposed to in it unacceptably being sexist towards you.
I think it's exactly right. And for me, I value integrity above pretty much anything else in politics. I think it's really important. People put their trust and their faith in us when they elect us to do, what we think is right. And we have to repay that by being honest. And that honesty sometimes means holding your hands up and saying, I'm sorry, I didn't get this one right, I made a mistake. But unfortunately, as politicians with the spin machine around us, there is this tendency to try and kind of use subterfuge and spin and whatever to try and kind of get out of tricky situations. And I think the public like straight talkers. They would rather someone just say, sorry, I got it wrong, let's move on and repair the damage.
Including your boss, the Prime Minister.
I think so. Yeah. And actually, I had a discussion with the Prime Minister on this very issue and about how the handling of the whole kind of Partygate saga right from the get-go was wrong. And he said he didn't disagree with me, actually.
How interesting. Final question, and I mentioned it when we were chatting earlier on. Lindsay Hoyle has written a very powerful piece in The Observer this morning. And when he took over as Speaker from John Bercow, he said, I'm not having this sexism, I'm not having this bullying and all of that kind of stuff. And he's now talking about a Speakers' Conference.
Yeah.
Is that the sensible way forward? Isn't it just a case of Keir, Boris, Ed, the rest of them, reading the Riot Act to all of you, particularly the guys?
I think so. I mean, it is important that the kind of institutions of Parliament led by the Speaker do kind of get this right as well. But actually, it is for party leaders, I think, to talk to their individual members and say, come on. And I was going to say, come on, lads. It usually is, lads, in this case, when we're talking about the misogyny, sexism argument in particular. But actually, for all of us to do better, be better, use our words much more carefully. I do think it's right for party leaders to step in, read people the Riot Act, but also to act really swiftly where there are allegations made.
Sure.
You know, people can be found guilty or not guilty, but send it for investigation straight away, withdraw the whip if needs be, restore it if needs be, but let's just get some integrity and trust back into this system.
All right. The final question, and again, it worried me slightly when I read it. I think it's in the Telegraph, is Oliver Dowden talking about 50% of Tory MPs next time round will be women. If that's a great idea, why didn't he tell us about it earlier? And secondly, is it a right idea? Don't local associations like yours in Bishop Auckland have the right to choose whoever? Labour got into terrible trouble over this, only women lists and what have you. I want the best possible MP in my constituency down in Hampshire who happens to be a woman, by the by. Is Oliver on the money here, or is it a knee-jerk reaction?
I think yes and no. We need to look quite carefully at what he said, because what is not being proposed are all-women shortlists or quotas or anything along those lines. It's more an ambition to try and encourage more women to put themselves forward, to stand, and to get some of those women through the actual process of becoming a candidate and then helping guide them through selection processes. Because one of the things that I found from speaking to candidates over, the 12 years that I've been involved, is that usually women are more reluctant to put themselves forward. A bloke will say, I'm going to do it. A woman needs to be asked before she gets the confidence to do it. So we need to find some of the talent of the future and really cultivate it. But also, the process is really hardcore. So groups like Women to Win in the Conservative Party, and I know there are equivalents in other parties, do really well in helping train up women, prepare them for the process, get them through it. Because I think, genuinely, Parliament would be better if it was more reflective of society. But we certainly shouldn't impose quotas or all-women shortlists. I was selected in Bishop Auckland. There were 3 of us in the shortlist. I was the only woman, and I won because they liked me more. They thought I'd do a better job. That's how it should be.
That's exactly
absolutely how it should be. It should be the best person for the job. But we need to help the pipeline. We need to encourage more women to get involved, doing that through kind of encouraging steps rather than anything kind of more regimented, is my view.
Good to see you. And thank you for
Likewise.
extending your day,
quite
your
all right.
working day.
Anything for you, Alistair.
You take care, and thank you very much, Dean. If you have a chance to listen to Barbara Follett later on, I think you'll genuinely find that conversation interesting. So that was my good friend, Deanna Davison, Conservative Member of Parliament for Bishop Auckland, and of course fellow GB News presenter. Sitting on the sofa, listening to what she had to say and my questions, I'm delighted to say, are the former Downing Street advisor, Sean Worth, who's been on the programme a few times before, and a new friend. I'm delighted to welcome the deputy editor of The Spectator, Freddie Gray. First of all, that point about damage to the party, and I visit that one upon you. I've got other points to raise with you particularly. But Mr Parish eventually did the right thing. The game was up. However you want to analyse it, it doesn't matter. The party leaders and the whips, the disciplinarians, they knew about all of this for 3 days. Should they not simply have called him in and said, you're out, you're done, you're busted?
Yeah, I don't know what the internal process was, but the difficulty nowadays is that these allegations can go around social media immediately. So if somebody says something or somebody sees something, they tell somebody else, and before you know it, it's going viral on Twitter, and then the party's trying to catch up. So I agree with your friend there who said, it could have been handled a lot quicker and just, especially as you said, somebody else started getting in the frame.
That I thought was particularly offensive aspect of it,
I agree with you. But, it's just the speed that things can get out there now. I mean, in the old days, it would be a rumour, and to get it out there, you'd have to basically go to the newspapers. And there's a proper, there's a much longer process for that.
Do you think that was a failure, Freddie, of political antennae? They just didn't sense that something was about to blow up in their faces or that they were preoccupied by other crises?
I think the problem's a bit deeper than that. I think the problem is that Westminster is a lot like school. It's become childish, and social media hasn't helped with that because sort of information flies around very quickly, like gossip in school, and you end up with this situation where it's tittle-tattle. and it starts dominating the national conversation. And I don't want to sound pious here, but there are important things going on, like potentially World War III, like the cost of living crisis. And we've had, 10 days now of the news being dominated by a woman crossing or uncrossing her legs and a man looking at tractors/pornography. It's not a normal thing. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I like the gossip as much as anyone else, but we need a Westminster that takes itself more seriously.
Absolutely.
And we don't have it.
No, and actually the 2 points are tied perfectly together, which is very strongly my own view, and that is, this is a government that's telling me I now have to pay 1.25% more in national insurance. This is a government that told me 18 months ago, 24 months ago, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that because of COVID and the rest of it. I look at this stuff and say, why should you tell me what to do? I probably know better than some of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about the school point and the fact that social media drives these scandals around much more quickly than ever did. But it's always been like this, and I think there will be an adjustment in politics. And if you look at America, we tend to follow America culturally in lots and lots of things. I can see our Parliament going more towards a sort of hyper-professional, very well schooled, grilled.
I was going to say hearings on Capitol Hill. Exactly. I want you to be my next Chancellor of the Exchequer, but you've got to pass a whole lot of grilling.
And I didn't mean to disrespect current MPs, but there are lots and lots of people that they've got no qualification for the job that they're doing. They happen to be liked locally or whatever, sure. And suddenly they're a national lawmaker, and we don't know who they are, what they've done before. Some of them have got no qualifications whatsoever. So, and with the increased scrutiny that social media is bringing, as I said earlier, there's always been scandals and people doing stupid stuff. And I'm afraid I found it quite funny, the tractor pull thing. I know everyone's saying it's really serious and awful, but everybody I know that's not in politics just thinks it's hilarious.
Is it in the same league as expenses? Because that really struck almost a moral chord with folk out there.
I think it's sillier than that. I don't think it's...
Sillier, but not as serious.
Not as serious. Although I do think the issue of Westminster becoming so childish is very, very serious. And I think, one thing, I'm very reactionary on mobile phones in the chamber. I don't think they should be there. But when I talk to MPs about that, they say, absolutely, do you realise how much work I've got to do? I have 5 hours I have to spend in there if I want to make a speech. And of course I've got to do my emails. But they're not all doing their emails. They're doing Twitter. They're doing WhatsApp. Yeah. They're looking at tractors.
Or they're being told what to say by the party management. Let me ask both of you this, because and Diana was very clear upon it, whether the issue is the Angela Rayner case and what happened or didn't happen in Durham and the sexism and parish and pornography. That's in one box over here. The other thing are these 50-plus cases, allegedly, of members of Parliament, 3 in the Cabinet, 2 on the front bench for Labour, facing allegations possibly of inappropriate sexual behaviour, misconduct. And yet, Mr. Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, is talking about a Speakers' Conference, not about that at all, but about the rights of MPs to employ their own staff and to take that out of the game. I mean, I'm a big fan of Lindsay Hoyle's, but that seems to me to be completely off the money.
Well, I think the problem is, again, trying to address the culture. They're not addressing the fundamental problem, which is MPs' behaviour. You can make these little sort of technical changes to how MPs lead their lives, to how things work in Westminster. It's not going to change the culture. And I think, again, the problem is bigger. It's all the media talks about. The relationship between media and journalists is a terrible thing. WhatsApp groups between media and journalists are awful things that sort of increase this kind of gossipy, insane environment that exists in SW1. And people outside of SW1 think, who are these children running us?
Yeah. Final point, and trying to pull it together, as it were, my intro, monologue, call it what you will, said at the end of it all, I feel, as a Democrat, a passionate Democrat, I feel a bit disappointed about it all and a bit worried. Will it blow away? Will it pass in the night?
I think, well, the consolation is it's happening elsewhere. I think in advanced democracies everywhere, the people have this sense of disappointment with their leaders. How it changes, how it fixes without huge reforms to the way democracies operate is a big question. It's something people are talking a lot about in America, people talk about in France recently with the election. you know, it all gets wrapped up in, like, is this what populism is all about? It's not necessarily that. It's just that people want better leaders, and they don't have them.
Yeah. Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are just genuinely flawed. We're all flawed, aren't we? And MPs are no different from anyone else. But unfortunately for them, sometimes there's such a degree of expectation, rightly, as you say, on these people because they're lawmakers. And as I go back to my point earlier, I mean, there's very little. I mean, there's no training, I don't think, for any of these roles. You're sort of plucked off the street and suddenly you're running the country. They're not paid a great deal, so you don't tend to get people that are very ambitious, career-minded, and you often get the wrong kinds of people, if I can put it that way, to, you know, half the ministers, and probably most of the ministers actually in government right now, have no background, training, qualifications or anything in the stuff that they're running. Unlike, you know, as I say, America, it just seems to be a lot more professionalised. I do think we're moving that way, but it'll take a long time, and I wonder if they'll push it or just let it happen naturally.
I'm going to ask both of you to go and stretch your legs, have a coffee, do whatever you want to do, and then rejoin me at 1 o'clock, if you would. As I told you outside, we'll be joined by Eleanor Goodman, who was FT and Channel 4 News. But for the time being, Sean and Freddie, thank you both very, very much indeed. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on today's programme as the government's white paper on food strategy is just about to be revealed this month. There are growing price concerns for farmers and for us consumers. We'll have the latest from the front line of farming. But first, let's bring you the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking cloudy and wet, particularly for central and western parts of England and Wales. Let's take a look at the details. In the southwest, it's been a mostly dry start to the day. However, some rain is sweeping in from the north, and this could be heavy at times, especially over the moors. Rain will continue to spread its way south-eastwards across London as well as we go through this afternoon. It should be mostly light here. After a very wet morning in Wales, the rain should start to ease as little as we head through the afternoon, though staying damp. Looking across northwest England, and here too, the worst of the rain will have come through this morning. That being said, there will be further outbreaks of rain to come and staying cloudy. In the northeast, there will be little change as we go through the afternoon, with quite a lot of cloud. As a result, temperatures will struggle, but it should be mostly dry. Across Scotland, it will be a lot drier and also warmer than yesterday. However, there will only be limited bright or sunny breaks for many, with some showers also likely. It will also be less unsettled than yesterday for Northern Ireland. Here, there will still be quite a few spells of rain this afternoon, but we should also see some sunny breaks. The more persistent rain will clear southwards this evening, but it will remain cloudy and quite damp for many. And that's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 28 minutes past 12. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. 28 minutes ago, I asked for your emails on my main themes of the day, and you have already been at it, for which I am very grateful, and I hope that you'll keep it going throughout the programme. We're here until 2 o'clock. Let's start off with Bernard, who says, and I quote, "In normal work circumstances, you would get a verbal warning for a first offence. It just shows what low standards MPs have when they can't wait to get their own colleagues into trouble. All they needed to do was tell him that they saw him, seek an explanation, then tell him not to do it again. Otherwise, they then report him." Phil has an interesting twist on that, which I find intriguing. Phil says, yes, the MP, Mr Parish, was wrong for watching pornography at work, but so were the 2 female MPs for looking at his personal phone. I bet if one of these women were cheating on their significant others and that someone looked into their phones, they would scream, breach of privacy. Goodness gracious me, interesting stuff. Keep it coming. GB Views at GB News or via Twitter. Now, just as the government's food strategy white paper is due to be revealed this month, there are concerns about how we can ensure fair prices for farmers while keeping costs low for us consumers. It is a delicate balancing act, which is being felt right across the agricultural sector. Our Wales reporter Lily Hewitson sent us this report from a farm in St Bride's Major in South Wales.
Good afternoon, Alistair. It's a question that consumers and farmers across the UK have been thinking about. Is it possible to keep our food shopping cheap whilst ensuring that farmers across the UK are getting a fair deal for their produce? Of course, this is their livelihood, so it's very important. Now, there's nobody better to speak to about this than Polly, who's very kindly had us on her farm here today. Thank you so much for having us, Polly. When it comes to food sustainability, security and affordability, is it possible to have all 3 things?
I don't think it is possible to have it all. I mean, from a farmer's perspective, we have to pay a minimum wage and we have to pay rent, and the result is that food cannot be as cheap as it fundamentally is at the moment. It just makes farming unsustainable. All that will happen is we'll just import all the food and not have any sort of food security in our own country. I think we've got to support our own farmers and we've got to pay the right value and the cost of food. Currently it is just too cheap. I completely appreciate that loads of people can't currently afford the food prices, but it's the government who has to step up to give that support to those people, because we as a nation have to prioritise food and farming more than we currently do.
And at the moment, we've got the ongoing situation with the war in Ukraine. Of course, we're dealing with the cost of living crisis here in the UK. How is that impacting the desire to have all of these things when it comes to our food prices?
I think the war in Ukraine is really interesting because it has fundamentally increased the price of wheat, because Ukraine was a massive wheat producing nation. So it's made everyone in the UK value the price of wheat more, and it's pushed up our prices as farmers, which is great, but it has to be more of a long-term thing. And we have to realise that we can't rely on other countries as much as we currently are, and we must support farmers here and in the UK and Wales.
So what can consumers and shoppers across the UK do to support farmers like you when they are going to do their weekly food shops?
I think the most important thing people can do is support their local farmers. Don't go to the supermarket, and look for local shops that where farmers are selling direct to the public, whether that be milk, meat or vegetables. There are loads of farmers all across the UK that are trying to farm with nature and producing their own food. It might just be slightly more expensive, but it's obviously definitely worth it. You can understand the farmer's story, and you can and ask them questions and get a whole understanding about what farming is all about.
Now, tell us a little bit more about your farm here in St Bride's Major. It's been a fantastic day meeting all the sheep, and there's so many more animals to meet as well. But how are you finding things? Are you getting a fair price for your produce?
We sell lots of our produce directly, but we found in the last probably 6 months, our customers have gone back to their old habits and gone back to the supermarket. So we'd really like everyone to come back and sort of support local and buy local. We deliver meat boxes monthly round the Vale of Glamorgan and Cardiff, and we'd love people just to support us and try and buy local and appreciate the different produce that we can get here in the UK. And we sell meat in terms of beef, lamb, pork and mutton, and we also sell vegetables 6 months of the year. But as I'm sure lots of people are aware, it's pretty difficult to grow vegetables at this time of year, so we tend to just grow vegetables from June to December.
Lovely stuff. Well, thank you so much for having us here today, Polly. It's been fantastic to meet you and this little one as well. Of course, when it comes to food sustainability, affordability and security, it's a really complicated picture. But from what Polly has said, it really has to be a group effort to have any chance at making it work. For now, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, and through you, thanks to your lovely guests and the wonderful choral sheep and lambs in the background. Great stuff there from Lily Hewitson, GB News' Wales reporter, bringing us up to date on that white paper and the pressures that are on farmers. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon. Tom Tugendhat, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, will be joining me to discuss the Homes for Ukraine scheme. That's next, but first let's get the latest news from Olivia Guthrie.
Thank you. It's 12:34. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. GB News can reveal hundreds of people on board multiple small boats have been intercepted by UK authorities in the English Channel this morning. It follows 11 days in which no small boats made it into British waters. Since first light, at least 7 vessels have been spotted and intercepted. At least 230 people have now been taken to the UK Border Force's processing centre in Dover. It's reported about 40 civilians who fled the steel plant in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol have arrived at a temporary accommodation centre in the Donetsk region. A source says buses of evacuees with Ukrainian number plates were in convoy with Russian troops and vehicles displaying United Nations symbols. It's as the Pope condemns Russia's attack on Mariupol, describing it as being barbarously bombarded and destroyed. Common Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is calling for radical reform after a series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations involving MPs in Parliament. Writing in The Observer, Sir Lindsay says he wants to make the House a safe and inclusive place to work. The statement comes after MP Neil Parish resigned after being caught watching pornography in the Commons. The Business Secretary has written to North Sea oil and gas firms asking them to come up with a plan to increase domestic production. Kwasi Kwarteng says the industry must invest in homegrown energy production to boost the British economy and bring down consumer bills in the long term. He said firms must also set out plans for investment in clean energy ahead of a meeting in the coming weeks. COVID guidance in Scotland is changing from today. Those with the virus will no longer need to self-isolate, but will still be advised to stay at home. Contact tracing has also come to an end as numbers of the virus continue to fall. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Alistair will be back in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, but to the point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Just coming up to 20 to 1, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Now, earlier this week, the government was found to have acted, quotes, unlawfully in moving hospital patients to care homes in the early weeks of the coronavirus outbreak back in 2020. The judges observed that the drafters of the regulations that oversaw that operation had failed to take into account the risk to elderly and vulnerable residents from asymptomatic transmission of COVID, which the government's chief scientific officer had warned about. They also said that the claimants, two women whose fathers had both died with COVID in care homes, had sought only a declaration from the court and had not asked for compensation, meaning that the ruling has no direct and immediate consequences. The subject is also expected to be covered in a separate public inquiry. Now, many people who lost loved ones in care homes as a result of that move are now considering, nevertheless, their options. And I'm delighted to be joined here live in the studio by a good friend of this programme, Edward Henry QC, Regulation and Criminal Law Specialist at Mountford Chambers. So good of you to come in, Edward. And I did warn you that I wanted to ask you something else before we get on to that, which is very important. The Observer splash, and I'll just hold it up. If you're listening on radio, it's The Observer, quotes, disgraced MP broke law by watching porn in Commons. Now, they put the broke law in inverted commas, which is a kind of journalistic signal that maybe not. Is it possible that Mr Parish broke the law?
It may well be. Of course, it depends also where you look at things. I mean, for example, if you're looking at things in a public place, let's say you were on a bus and you were looking at hardcore pornography on your phone, you could cause alarm or distress to somebody else on the bus, and so therefore a Public Order Act offence could be committed. But in the chamber of the House of Commons, I think the Indecent Displays Control Act of 1981 may become engaged.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that it was two women, fellow Tory MPs, who spotted it and clearly were offended. They just thought it was wrong and reported it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think even a male Tory MP, if he spotted it, should have reported it as well.
OK, let's move on to care homes. Is it possible that this use of the word unlawful is also slightly misleading? I mean, what statute, what law was breached in this operation?
I think it's terribly important to reassure your listeners at the outset that although there has been a lot of demonising of the judiciary does not enter into hard politics. And people will laugh when I say that, but they don't. What they do is they stand apart. They don't consider policy decisions that have been carefully considered, where all the relevant issues have been weighed. What gave them the right to intervene on behalf of the claimants in this case was because the government had totally failed, I mean completely, to consider a highly relevant consideration, which was asymptomatic transmission. And in failing to consider it at all, not balancing competing interests, but totally failing to consider it, they acted unlawfully because, of course, we expect governments to act rationally on our behalf. We expect
But that's a very important legal distinction, isn't it? Because when you were kindly answering my question about Mr Parish, you cited not one but two statutes which he may have been in breach of. This is basically about duty of care and not acting responsibly.
This is about public law. This is about public law where the courts are entitled to intervene where the government doesn't consider something which is highly relevant, or considers an issue which is totally irrelevant. So, for example, you saw it with the pushback policy, where the Home Secretary capitulated on that because various issues which would have triggered, for example, the right to life, had not been properly considered. And it's about mitigation of risk and governments acting lawfully in that case. In this case, the advice that was given at the end of March and at the beginning of April, end of March, the discharge policy, beginning of April, the admissions into care homes policy or social care settings, neither of them had considered asymptomatic transmission. And so therefore you were, as it were, opening the gates, opening the doors of these care homes to patients or individuals who come from hospital, and they may well have had COVID.
Sure.
And they weren't isolated for a short period of time. And as a result, thousands upon thousands of people have died.
Yeah. The other crucial thing, and I said it in my introduction, is the observation from the judges that the claimant sought a declaration in law, not damages. That said, does this declaration of unlawful behaviour open the doors to damages?
Well, that, I think, is an issue that has to be reflected on very carefully by anybody who has lost a loved one. And I extend my sympathy, my condolences. One of my friends, dear friends, died in a care home. I think the answer lies in the public inquiry. There's going to be a public inquiry by Dame Heather Hallett, formerly Lady Justice Hallett. And that public inquiry, I think it's very, very, very important for members of the public who have lost their loved ones to find appropriate and professional legal advice so that a body of them, a cadre of them, can be represented by responsible lawyers and so that the truth is known. The truth is known because then, subsequent to that public inquiry, I think that there may well be a claim.
Sure. I want to bring in Nadra Ahmed now, who's the executive chair of the National Care Association. And I hope, Nadra, great to talk to you again. Been on the programme several times, that you were able to hear what Edward was saying there. How would you characterise the reaction from families who lost loved ones in care homes as a result of this judgment?
Well, I think what it did for a lot of relatives that we've been in contact with was it started to unravel the web of lies that was being fed at that time to the public when the provider sector was actually screaming out for support and help. Because we knew that something wasn't quite right when we were being told that people coming out of hospital didn't have the virus. We had nothing to worry about, and yet within days of it, you could see the infection spreading through the service. So it would, it's not rocket science that something was going horribly wrong. We started to get the blame cultures around, this was being brought in by staff. It was, all sorts of, your infection prevention control measures weren't good enough. All of these things were part of the solution that we were trying to mitigate. But actually,
and from the outset, Nadra, from the outset, you never bought into the assurance that a protective ring was going to be thrown around care homes, did you?
No, it was complete and utter rubbish, and I think I've publicly said it so many times, that they were lies. The only protective ring was around the NHS, and we wanted to support our NHS colleagues, but in doing so, what government did was they absolutely ignored the cries of the social care sector, the provider sector, the care homes, to the point where PPE that would normally be delivered to us was being diverted. So we were being told we didn't need to wear masks. All the guidance was very, very chaotic. And an inquiry, as has already been said, is what will be required. But what this does do is it raises the questions for those people who did lose their loved ones, who are reliving it as they hear all of this. And wondering.
I'm going to bring Edward back in for a final quick thought on that. I mean,
it wasn't a protective.
It couldn't be clearer, could it?
No, it wasn't.
It
wasn't a protective ring, Alistair. It was the hole in the donut. They just didn't care. It would seem about the social care sector, and I mean, it's very, very important. If I could just very briefly. On the 9th of March, Lord Bethell in the House of Lords talked about the risk of asymptomatic transmission. The European Centre for Disease Protection and Control issued a paper on the 12th of March. Sir Patrick Vallance on Radio 4 Today on the 13th of March. Again, asymptomatic transmission. On the 15th of March, Imperial College and Columbia University, asymptomatic transmission. All of these risks. And yet, in their apologies last week, the Prime Minister and Mr. Hancock, the former Secretary of State, said that, you know, so little was known and they weren't really aware of this. It's not right. I believe it was ruthless expediency.
Edward Henry QC, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Nadra Ahmed, always good to talk to you. And as we move closer to that inquiry that Edward was talking about, I hope very much indeed we can re-engage in our conversation. But for the time being, thank you so much and have a great what's left of Sunday afternoon. Thank you, Nadra. So that was Nadra Ahmed, OBE, the Executive Chair of the National Care Association, and Edward Henry QC. Yesterday, I spoke in depth with a Ukrainian MP and two gentlemen who've gone above and beyond out of their own goodwill to try and help Ukrainian refugees to come here to safety. Since the government said it was opening up two schemes to help Ukrainian refugees seek sanctuary in the United Kingdom, over 130,000 of you have offered to help and host them. But it's been a painfully slow process, so much so that the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, offered a public apology this week. So today I wanted to continue that conversation and ask some more questions, and I'm delighted to be joined now by someone who's at the forefront of this operation, Tom Tugendhat, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, partly because I saw you tweet about the two people in your own constituencies who had been welcomed. But first, I have to ask you two very quick questions, and that is over the Speaker's suggestion that what is needed to get out of this mess, not only the Neil Parish one, but MPs not telling the truth about what events they were at and flashing legs and all the rest of it. Is a Speaker's conference really the answer to that, Tom?
Well, I certainly think a wider conversation is the answer. But let's be honest, you know, a lot of this misogyny, I'm afraid, is the whole of society. You know, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm finding this really quite tiring for the simple reason that we have been here for generations now. And, you know, we are making some wonderful advances in science and medicine. And I really hoped that we were making some fantastic advances in society as well. You know, the behaviour that we should have towards each other is pretty obvious, really, isn't it? I mean, you know, I'm not sure it requires that much explanation. And yet here we are going around again.
I suggested at the beginning of the programme to Deanna Davison, and she agreed, that the best thing, forget Speaker's Conference and the rest of it, is for the party leaders, whether it's Tory, Labour, Liberal Democrat, the rest of them, it is basically to lead and read the Riot Act if necessary to members of Parliament who may not quite understand what their responsibilities are.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I don't think you need to be told what you could and couldn't look at on your mobile phone in a workplace, Alistair. I mean, you know, you're a grown-up, you know the basic rules of society. I don't think it's that hard. And I just think we need to be a little bit more respectful to each other and just remember that in the whole of society, I'm afraid misogyny is still far too much of an issue and we need to address it together.
Agreed. On Ukraine, after a public apology from the Home Secretary and Lord Harrington being appointed specifically to sort it out, why, in your view, are so many of the 130,000 people who've offered to help not being given the opportunity so to do?
Well, look, there's a whole series of issues behind that, as you know, Alistair. But first of all, Richard Harrington is an exceptional individual and a fantastic organiser. So I'm very pleased he's taken on the job. It's very good of him to do so. He's a really talented guy. So I'm looking forward to him sorting this out. The problem is there's a lot of complexity here. And let's just be quite clear what we're talking about. You know, you and I are quite rightly focusing on the fact that the British people are unbelievably generous and demonstrating that those who claim that we're some sort of, you know, xenophobic, closed-off island, it's complete rubbish. We're an extremely open, welcoming community who have opened our hearts and quite literally our homes to people in need. That is fantastic. Sadly, we also know there are a tiny, tiny number of people who are seeing this as an opportunity to exploit people. And that's why there is some control, some verification, some support that needs to be put in place. And that's what we've got to get right. Now, having spoken to friends of mine in parliaments across the European Union and governments across Europe, I can tell you that other countries are facing very, very similar difficulties. And where they are translating speed, preferring speed rather than detail, I'm afraid what is sometimes sadly happening is young people, particularly young women, are finding themselves in very difficult and very dangerous circumstances. So this isn't something that we can take lightly. I do understand the issue that, you know, people have been extraordinarily generous, but we've got to make sure we get this right, not just fast.
I completely accept that, but the raw politics of it as well, Tom, is a government that squanders public goodwill at a time when its back is to a degree up against the wall is a crazy government.
You're absolutely right, Alistair, and that's where leadership matters. And, you know, we've got to demonstrate the leadership and the integrity that makes the difference. You know, the reality is that the British people have made the most extraordinarily generous efforts. You know, people like my former colleague Brooks Newmark are going out there and helping people inside Ukraine and on the Polish border. Others are going and quite literally taking emergency food aid or going and picking up people from the border and taking them to their homes. You know, and you know, the two people I saw Friday, forgive me, were now new constituents of mine. So they joined Nader Ahmed in that way. They're two new constituents of mine, and I'm delighted to see them settle here with their families, their young kids, and you know, making what both of them said to me. They hope to be very, very temporary homes here. They both want to go home as soon as possible, as you can imagine. And I think you're absolutely right. We do need to capitalise on that. But what's really inspiring, actually, is the community response in both cases. Yes, there was one person who offered a home. Yes, there's one person who completed the application form and, you know, did the visa stuff and all the rest of it. But actually, it's an entire community. In one case, a village, in another case, a street, who have rallied round to provide, you know, everything from an Xbox for the kids to a school place to, you know, all the sort of things that you might need. Some of them are getting legal advice. Some of them are offering, you know, extra support. So, you know, the community response is truly inspiring. And I think we should celebrate the British people for the extraordinary, open, generous approach that we've had.
On the fighting itself in Ukraine, we were talking to Kira Rudik yesterday, who I think is a Ukrainian MP that you are aware of as well. Yeah,
she's a good friend. Very, very.
She was saying it's getting a heck of a lot worse. Russia may be faltering here and there and have old maps and what have you, but Putin is poised to declare an all-out war, bring in more reservists. How troubled are you by that prospect?
Well, look, I'm very concerned about it. I mean, the one thing that we know about President Putin, sadly, is that he cares nothing for the lives either of Ukrainians or indeed for young Russians. You know, he is throwing young Russians into a meat grinder and getting them killed in extraordinary numbers, the sort of kind of numbers we haven't seen since Afghanistan or indeed in some ways since the Second World War. This is absolutely horrific. You know, he did the same in Grozny, in the Chechen War. You know, he has done it time and time again. What we need to do is to make sure that the Ukrainian people are able to defend themselves, because they are quite literally on the front line of our freedom. If Putin wins in Ukraine, he will turn his attention to places like Poland, to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, countries that are guaranteed protection by us under our NATO agreements. And if we were to let that fall, we'd be in real trouble. So, look, it's absolutely essential we manage to maintain the support for the Ukrainian people. I think the British people have demonstrated they're behind it. The government is certainly doing its bit, but we need to go further and do more, because this is fundamentally about our security and our peace. And if we want to be safe here in Kent, or where you are, Alistair, in London, or indeed in Glasgow or Wolverhampton, we need to make sure that our borders are safe and that we're well guarded. And we're doing that by keeping Ukraine safe.
Sure. I'm going to pick out one word from that very crisp analysis, and it is the word further. Was the Foreign Secretary, and part of your committee's job is to keep an eye on what she's doing, what she's saying, and the development of policy. Was Liz right to say that Russia must be swept out of all of Ukraine?
Well, I was a little surprised by that, because that's not my decision, and I don't think it's hers either. That's a decision for President Zelensky, who's demonstrated the extraordinary courage and integrity to lead his people in war. Now, it's up to him whether he decides, rather, it's up to him and the Ukrainian people, of course, to decide what sacrifices they're willing to make for which parcel of land. That's not my decision. Now, if they decide that they wish to fight for the whole of Donetsk and Luhansk, right, that's up to them, and we should support them. If they decide to fight for the whole of Crimea, then that's up to them, and we should support them. Those are territorially, internationally recognized borders that we reckon, you know, that nobody disputes except for the Russian Federation, because they occupied them. So we need to be absolutely clear that we will support Zelensky and President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. But it's not for me to tell them what sacrifice is worth making. It's not for me to tell them where their young people should die and what to fight for. That's I'm afraid, a decision for the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government.
Tom Tugendhat, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for finding time for us this Sunday afternoon. Tom Tugendhat, Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon. We'll be continuing our conversation on the ongoings in Parliament this week and what it's like to be a woman in politics right now. That's after this break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. It is just about half a minute past 1. And if you've just joined us, a very warm welcome to you. And if you've been with us since 12 o'clock, thank you very much indeed. I am Alastair Stewart, and we're into the last hour of the programme. We'll be keeping you company on TV and radio here on GB News, and we've plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion, the state of Parliament and what it's like to be a woman in politics right now. We'll hear what you think as well. We've had some of that already, but it's getting even hotter. But first of all, let's bring you right up to date with all of the latest news. Here once again is Olivia Guthrie.
Alistair, thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. Here's the latest from the newsroom. GB News can reveal hundreds of people on board multiple small boats have been intercepted in the English Channel by UK authorities this morning. It follows 11 days in which no small boats made it into British waters. Since first light, at least 7 vessels have been spotted and intercepted. At least 230 people have now been taken to the UK Border Forces Processing Centre in Dover. It's reported about 40 civilians who fled the steel plant in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol have arrived at a temporary accommodation centre in the Donetsk region. New footage appears to show buses of evacuees with Ukrainian number plates in convoy with Russian troops and vehicles displaying United Nations symbols. It's as the Pope condemns Russia's attack on Mariupol, describing it as being barbarously bombarded and destroyed. He's urged Moscow to establish a humanitarian corridor to evacuate those still sheltering in the Azovstal steel plant. President Zelensky says Russian attacks in the east continue.
The occupiers are gathering additional forces for new attacks against our military in the east of the country. Russia has brought reinforcements in the Kharkiv region, trying to increase pressure in the Donbas. They've lost more than 23,000 soldiers in the battles of this senseless war, but they do not stop.
Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is calling for radical reform after a series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations involving MPs in Parliament. Writing in The Observer today, Sir Lindsay says he wants to make the House a safe and inclusive place to work. He believes working practices need to be overhauled, including stopping MPs from directly employing their staff. The statement comes after MP Neil Parish resigned after being caught watching pornography in the Commons. Chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, Caroline Noakes, told GB News policy reform is well overdue.
If somebody had been watching pornography on the checkout in Tesco's or in any other workplace, they'd have been out the door that afternoon. And that's the significant difference, and where so many of us felt let down over the course of the past few days, is that there wasn't that swift mechanism that could work. There wasn't the ability to say, well, look, here's a policy. It's in contravention of the policy. Then you can take all of the personalities out of it if something is in contravention of a clearly stated policy. And a lot of us have been calling for that for a long time.
While Tory party chairman Oliver Dowden says the Conservative Party will make sure its candidate list becomes more equal. He told the Sunday Telegraph it should reflect that half the population are women. Around a quarter of Tory candidates at the 2019 election were women, but Labour managed more than half. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries says ensuring a majority of women in Parliament could help tackle Westminster sleaze. Interest rates are expected to be increased on Thursday to their highest level for 13 years. Economists predict the Bank of England will raise rates from 0.75% to 1%, a number not seen since early 2009. Members of the bank's Monetary Policy Committee have raised rates at each of its past 3 meetings as part of attempts to rein in record inflation. It comes as the war in Ukraine adds to the ongoing cost of living crisis. The Business Secretary has written to North Sea oil and gas firms asking them to come up with a plan to increase domestic production. Kwasi Kwarteng says the industry must invest in homegrown energy production to boost the British economy and bring down consumer bills in the long term. He said firms must also set out plans for investment in clean energy ahead of a meeting in the coming weeks. COVID guidance in Scotland is changing from today. Those with the virus will no longer need to self-isolate, but will still be advised to stay at home. Contact tracing has also come to an end as case numbers continue to fall. The number of COVID infections has dropped for the 5th successive week, with about 1 in 5 people having the virus. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Alistair.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed. Exactly 6 minutes past 1. By any measure, it is an extraordinary story. A Conservative Member of Parliament, Neil Parish, spotted by 2 fellow Tory MPs, both women, looking at pornography on his mobile phone, once in the chamber of the House of Commons and on another occasion at a committee meeting. Initially, it seemed that he'd try and brazen it out, but yesterday afternoon he announced he was resigning as a Member of Parliament. So, what does it actually tell us about the state of Parliament and parliamentarians? I ask that because it also comes at a time when it's been widely reported that more than 50 MPs could face allegations of sexual misconduct. That total is said to include cabinet ministers and Labour frontbenchers. Has Parliament become a toxic place of work for women? Has behaviour that decades ago might have been dismissed or reluctantly accepted now become intolerable? And we're going to carry on our conversation with my 2 guests here in the studio, and we'll be also joined, I'm delighted to say, by Eleanor Goodman, who was Channel 4 News' political editor and before that with the FT. Barbara Follett also joins us as my final guest, one of the groundbreakers in trying to get more women into Parliament. And as always, we want to hear your thoughts. You've been very busy already. Email us at gbviews@gbnews, tweet us or tweet me, or you can go on to Facebook. And as promised, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Eleanor Goodman, formerly of the Financial Times and political editor of Channel 4 News, where we worked together for a wee while. Eleanor, great to see you, and thank you very much indeed for finding time for us. In your view, and nodding to your experience, has Mr. Parish taken us into new territory, or is it just a slightly bizarre twist on a common theme that's been around forever?
Well, I think it is new territory. I mean, I do find it completely and utterly extraordinary. But the fact is, there have been various fairly sordid incidents around the House of Commons for a long time. I think what has changed at the moment is two things. One, basically, attitudes to women in general have changed since the time when I joined in 1979. I first joined the lobby, and you had this rather curious thing that your job was to stand in the House of Commons lobby and approach MPs and try and... Actually, I seem to remember you weren't allowed to approach them. You had to wait for them to come to you, but I've forgotten that particular rule. But anyway, you stood in the lobby and you chatted to MPs, and they were very surprised to see women in that capacity because there were very few MPs, few women MPs at that time. And I was always fairly haughty, so no one very much approached me and in any way kind of offended me. There was one particular individual who was an official in the House of Commons whose party trick, or not his party trick, his routine introduction to a woman was to run his hand down her back to see if she was wearing a bra. Now, that kind of thing would no way be tolerated today. I think what was more general was a rather condescending attitude to women, sometimes very well meant. I remember meeting Dennis Healy, and he would always call me dear, and he knew it upset me and irritated me. But he would always say, "Hello, dearie, how are you?" And that was a sort of general atmosphere. It was in some ways like a men's club, particularly on the Tory side, and in some ways you got some of the attitudes from the trade union movement, which were dominated by men generally in those days. So you had that mixture. You also had the Whip's office, whose job they saw was to cover things up. Now, you can say that was still the case, and the way they didn't rush to get rid of Neil Parish suggests that attitude is still implicit. But they didn't have women at Whips for years. It was an all-male institution, and so much of the House of Commons was geared to men. Particularly the number of loos, I seem to remember, it just made the assumption that this was a place predominantly male. And think back way before my time, after the first or second woman Tory MP gave a speech in the Commons, Winston Churchill was said to have said that he felt as if a woman had invaded his bathroom, and he was seen with just a sponge covering his decency. So, okay, things move slowly, and they do move slowly in the Commons. And, one can be facile about this and make jokes, but it is extremely irritating. I think back to those early days when I first joined, and there was one particular woman called Elaine Kellett-Bowman who had a very high voice. And other MPs would barrack her throughout the time she spoke, including Tories on her own side, and imitate her very high voice and yell out. And it was extremely difficult for her to make a point. And then when you had MPs like Claire Short, they would be mocked for the shapes of their bodies and things. All these things have been around. But in some ways, these attitudes, I think, have changed. So it's some time since I was at the Commons. But on the other hand, on the downside, of course, you have the social media. So it's so much easier for an MP to approach somebody. And also, I mean, if you knew where to find it, to find pornography. Yeah. I have to say, I wonder if...
Let me butt in there, Eleanor. You mentioned Claire Short in passing, which... In a sense, it seems to me the upside, and both Sean Worth and Freddie Gray were saying it in our earlier conversation, the bottom line is that women have simply become more emboldened. And, of course, Claire famously called out a junior minister, Alan Clark, for allegedly being drunk at the dispatch box answering questions. And then we're celebrating or observing 25 years since Blair's victory that brought in people like Mo Mowlam to the House of Commons, who clearly would take no nonsense. I began the programme talking to Yana Davidson, fellow presenter here and the Tory MP for Bishop Auckland. These are tough cookies who simply won't take it anymore. And the women who reported Parish were both Tory MPs.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that's what I mean about attitudes changing. Expectations have changed. You don't expect this kind of thing to happen. I have to say, if that had happened at any point in as far as I'm concerned, my lifetime as a journalist, I mean, if someone had been flicking through pornographic magazines in the members' lobby and had been caught at it, actually, you wouldn't probably have reported it, because in those days there were all these rules about keeping things secret and keeping confidences. And I suspect women would have felt inhibited from reporting these things now in those days, and they aren't now. They're determined to make sure these things don't happen, and that must be a good thing. But as I say, social media has opened up all sorts of opportunities on the downside.
Gray, the deputy editor of The Spectator, you made a similar point about this, and you did as well, about social media changing the rules. But she's absolutely spot on, isn't she, about more women, tough women, simply, quote, I'm not going to take it anymore.
I think that is a perfectly good point. I suppose my point is that sort of making it a more egalitarian score in terms of men and women in Parliament is not going to solve the problem. And the problem is linked to technology. And linked to a general culture of childishness in Westminster. And, you know, I've been the Spectator.
But did Dennis Healey think it reasonable to run his hand down a woman's back to see if she was wearing a bra or not? Because he was of an age... Sorry, Anna.
I wasn't for a moment suggesting it was Dennis Healey who did that. Good God, no. No, it was...
Oh, no, he called you dear. Sorry, I take it all back. But would Dennis have called Eleanor dear because he thought that was acceptable, or because he was of a certain age, who fought in the Second World War, did Anzio and all the rest of it?
Because he was of a certain age.
It was a generational thing. But I'd also say that if you did have more women, I think women do change the atmosphere. And that's one of the, you know, it's much easier to object to some of you to get together and talk to each other about it and have a common front. You can't imagine in the Conservative Party in the 80s that there would have been a group of Tory MPs who met the 2022 club as women together. I just don't think that happened, and it was because of that meeting that these revelations became public, evidently.
Sure. Sean, you worked with John Major, and the era that Eleanor is referring to, obviously, is the Thatcher era. I mean, one of the most powerful women ever to grace Parliament, whether you thought she was good, bad or indifferent economically and politically. She was a toughie. Mm-hmm. Did she begin to change that process as well, or was that just let the chaps get on and do what they want?
I think she changed the culture. I mean, I didn't work for Mrs Thatcher.
No, you were John Major man, weren't you?
Well, Cameron, actually. But,
Cameron.
Yeah, I know all these figures. But
far too young.
But the real thing is, actually, the Houses of Parliament are a bit like a sort of mixed-sex boarding school with loads of pubs. And I think for always you've had terrible behaviour and drunkenness, and I've seen it myself. I've seen, you know, I'm no angel with alcohol, I like a drink, but, you know, I've been very surprised at the level of drunkenness I've seen MPs sort of staggering around and swaying and shouting and stuff. I think it's the culture.
And according to some reports, the Labour woman MP as well reported having got violent in the House as well.
Amazing stories you hear now because of social, as Eleanor's right, and social media just spreads these things like wildfire, when in the past they would be private, and there was a kind of, you know, it would sometimes leak out, but that would be because somebody told a journalist. Now it's a WhatsApp message and suddenly it's viral on social media. And I think the culture will change because of that, naturally. There's no HR department in Parliament like there is in a corporation, but they're under so much scrutiny, I think they will change.
And Eleanor, a thought on that, because we were talking earlier about whether Lindsay Hoyle's idea of a speakers' conference about who actually employed these researchers and men and women who worked for MPs should not be directly employed, implying that indeed there should be some sort of HR. Do you believe a speakers' conference is a good step in the current climate?
Well, I think in terms of the message it conveys to the outer world, it's a good thing insofar as it shows the Commons is taking this seriously. Because, I mean, what worries me about this is how bad it is for the House of Commons itself and democracy. I mean, if people think this is the kind of thing that's going on, and it isn't, I think, a mass thing. I think actually you've got the figures wrong. They've been corrected this morning. hate to say this, instead of there being 56 cases being investigated at the moment, something like 15 to 20, according to the organisation that's doing them. I think it would be good to be seen to be taking action like that, but I think it will affect things at the margins. I personally, I don't drink, but I don't mind my friends drinking. I'm all too happy to, but I do think the alcohol culture, certainly in my day, it liberated people to do things they, quotes, wouldn't have done normally. Actually, the bars are not nearly so important in terms of socialising as they used to be, because now far more people will go over the other side of the House of Commons to the atrium and have a coffee and talk there. So I think that the bar culture has slightly diminished, but it's probably left a hard core of it still going.
Final question to all three of you, starting with Eleanor, if I may. And the other thing that just strikes me, whether it's who was at that meeting up in Durham with Sir Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, and having very senior Labour frontbenchers on television this morning saying we got it wrong, we didn't tell it as it was initially, we've now had to correct that, through to the Prime Minister coming under pressure about not initially telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about parties and what have you. Isn't that, for voters within a democracy, even more important than who watches what on their telephone, or frankly, who gets drunk and falls over in a Commons bar, Ella?
I think it's all corrosive, the whole thing. I think it's the cumulative effect of all these things, the drip. I think in the short term, it's going to be bad for the Tories in terms of the local elections. So I think people are much more interested in other things, I think, by now. But in the long term, as I say, it's in the effect on people of why they should bother to vote that worries me. And the impression is always comes out of these stories, as it did through Sleaze and all the other ones we've had over the years, Cash for Questions, is that everybody's at it, when in fact an awful lot of people aren't at it. And it's a great shame if this is just succeeds in reinforcing that view.
Totally agree with that, Eleanor. Thank you very much indeed. I hope very much you'll come and do it again sometime, and then we'll find time to talk about horses and dogs as well, which we always both enjoy chatting. Take care. Corrosive. Bye. Corrosive is the headline word that sums up what the two of you were basically saying at the beginning of the programme, and Eleanor just articulated as well.
Corrosive, I quite agree, but I also think it's easy for us to sit here and say this is a Westminster problem, it's all disgusting and all that. The fact is this tittle-tattle is what interests people. It's what the media leads on because it's what people engage with. And so I think the problem is, as a culture, it's a bigger national problem, it's an international problem, that as a culture we're more interested in tittle-tattle than we are about the big stories that are happening. And so voters are angry about the big stories that are happening, the cost of living, but then they're engaging...
Is an MP watching porn on his phone, even if it's by accident, tittle-tattle?
No, it's a story. It's a major story. Should it have dominated the news as much as it did? I don't think so. Obviously, if it had been dealt with...
Is whether or not Angela Rayner was at the Durham meeting or not tittle-tattle?
Yes, I think it probably is.
Oh, fascinating.
The fact is that, as you say, I think all parties are at it, as you put it. Everyone's flawed. Everybody, these normal people with not particularly professional backgrounds getting drunk and doing all sorts of things. I think the real impact is voter turnout. And
absolutely.
And I do fear we're probably heading for a more American-style professional political culture, which would be very boring but much safer. And that'll be the consequence.
Yeah, and so in that sense, I wasn't being a drama queen at the beginning when I said our democracy is on the line now.
Exactly, yeah. The more you... I mean, if you just talk to any regular person who's got nothing to do with politics, they'll say, oh, they're all as bad as each other. Another story, the porn guy, I mean, I don't think anyone was even surprised about that nowadays. They just thought it was amazing, but not surprised about it at all.
Yeah. Let me throw something finally to you. I'm not going to bring Eleanor back because that line has now gone. But something that Tom Tugendhat said in my conversation with him about Ukraine and refugees, and funnily enough, I talked to Penny Mordaunt about it last weekend, and that is this idea of a government that's got its back against the wall, throwing away the goodwill of the British public over something like 130,000 saying, we want to help the Ukrainian refugees, and then not having a system. Tom made very strong points about security, and I do understand that, and vetting and the rest of it. But it is quite extraordinary that the government can't seem to get its head round the goodwill of the British people at the moment and win it back.
No, it can't. And on Ukraine, I think this is going to be something that's going to intensify in the next few days because the war's going to get worse. The refugee question is not going to go away. We think that Vladimir Putin is going to start talking in terms of world war more and more. There are threats of nuclear war. They're not to be taken lightly. And so as the government moves forward, can it get back the seriousness of the conversation it had a few weeks ago? Or is it just going to be mired in Westminster and in tittle-tattle that reveals how corrosive and how corroded our democracy is? But it's still tittle-tattle.
Yeah. Final point to you, because you worked in there with John Major, and we've talked before about the image and the press side of things. How extraordinary the journey is from Boris Johnson striding purposefully across the square in Keith to now having to get rid of a member of Parliament. Whether it's social media or whether it's just the news cycle, my God, these things move quickly.
They do. I think it's a real challenge. I mean, I think number 10 is across this challenge, actually, in Johnson's team yet. He's had a bit of churn with key advisors, but it's the really difficult thing is when all of this stuff is constantly going on, to be able to say to the public, especially now, we've got really important elections next week at local level, this is what this government stands for, this is what it's doing, here's my policy agenda, and here's what I'm going to be doing until the next election. I mean, I don't even know what that is, and I study this stuff every day. I mean, I can't see voters connecting on the way that you suggest until there's a much more coherent policy agenda with concrete things that the public can see happening, being built, being funded, whatever it is.
Freddie wants to come in on the Queen's speech, I'm going to predict.
Would you say that levelling up then hasn't worked?
Yes,
in terms of messaging, it's been a disaster.
It's a disaster, I think, personally. It's a list of targets for 2030. But at this election on the doorstep, I used to be a branch chairman, going around knocking on people's doors and organising campaigning. I don't know what I would say on the doorstep if they say, OK, what are you doing? What do you stand for? That's, I think, a really systemic problem that he needs to get a grip on.
I think the real debate, and this is my final observation, is between people like John Redwood and David Frost and Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. We'll have that debate again next time you're both kind enough to come in, because that really is the economic offer to you. It's not available on the May local elections, but it may well be here sooner than you think. There are a couple of newspapers predicting that Boris Johnson's cleared the decks for an early general election. Don't believe a word of it myself, but we'll look at those issues as and when. For the time being, Freddie Gray, great to meet you here. Thank you so much for having me. Welcome any time to return. And Sean, once again, always good to see you, and thank you very much indeed. We've plenty more still to come in the final half hour of Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, we'll be getting some of your reactions to today's big topic, the state of Parliament. Plus, delighted to be joined by Barbara Follett. She'll be here. But first, let's bring you up to date with the bank holiday weekend weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking cloudy and wet, particularly for central and western parts of England and Wales. Let's take a look at the details. In the southwest, it's been a mostly dry start to the day. However, some rain is sweeping in from the north, and this could be heavy at times, especially over the moors. Rain will continue to spread its way south-eastwards across London as well as we go through this afternoon. It should be mostly light here. After a very wet morning in Wales, the rain should start to ease as little as we head through the afternoon, though staying damp. Looking across northwest England, and here too, the worst of the rain will have come through this morning. That being said, there will be further outbreaks of rain to come and staying cloudy. In the northeast, there will be little change as we go through the afternoon, with quite a lot of cloud. As a result, temperatures will struggle, but it should be mostly dry. Across Scotland, it will be a lot drier and also warmer than yesterday. However, there will only be limited bright or sunny breaks for many, with some showers also likely. It will also be less unsettled than yesterday for Northern Ireland. Here, there will still be quite a few spells of rain this afternoon, but we should also see some sunny breaks. The more persistent rain will clear southwards this evening, but it will remain cloudy and quite damp for many. And that's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 1:30, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. I asked you for your thoughts and comments to get in touch on our big topics of the day, State of Parliament and our politicians, and you have been busy, for which I am enormously grateful. Let's start with Stephen, who says, can you also discuss the enormous cost of the government's spin machine? According to newspaper reports, Rishi Sunak's Treasury spin operation topped £3 million last year. All that money to make us think he's done a good job. Hope he keeps the receipts. Martin says, Alistair, please can you mention Durham Gate and its nuances? I got a direct tweet to me saying, I'm not watching anymore because you haven't talked about Durham and you haven't talked about Angela. We did, in all of our conversations, both of them. Anyway, I'm just clarifying that. And to the viewer who said wasn't going to watch anymore, your loss. I'm sorry, but do come back and give us another go. Carrying on with Martin, none of the other broadcasters are giving it airtime. Not sure that's entirely true. David Lammy was on another broadcaster this morning and got a thorough grilling about it. I think most people who watch GB News think it's serious. We are. As a well-placed, well-respected broadcaster, that's very generous of you, it would help clarify whether further police action is needed. That we don't know, but we have been following it, and if you're interested in what work has been done by GB News on it, follow Tom Harwood, my friend, the political correspondent, because he's done phenomenal work on it. Kenny, it's all very well having more women in Parliament as long as they are the most qualified of the nominations and not just because they are women. Interesting. Deanna Davidson said that right at the beginning of the programme. Elaine, personally, I'm disgusted by Keir Starmer. He has attacked others in such a personal and emotive way while being guilty of the same thing himself. I'm not sure what you mean by the same thing. I think be cautious about that, Elaine. I think many people would like it to be further investigated for the sake of fairness. If that's about Durham, absolutely fine, because the police did look at it, decided that no offence was committed, and there's a lot of pressure on the Durham police to look at it again. That was what Sir Keir and David Lammy have been seeking to clarify this morning. David, the way watching pornography in the House of Commons has been handled is over the top, in my opinion. Silly though the act was, it should have been handled differently. Neil Parish has now been publicly shamed on all media, in all newspapers. He will now endure opprobrium wherever he goes. And finally, a thought from Monica, who says, more regulations, more laws, ? Really? Be careful what you wish for. Seems to me that the Conservatives make these on the hoof. No depth of thought. Another U-turn. Thank you for all of those thoughts. Always interesting to hear what you say, and when I see them there, it's the first time I get a chance to go through it, so I hope I didn't mispronounce anything or accuse MPs of things that perhaps they haven't done. I seeking there to be as clear as possible. Now, in other news, in 2018, South Yorkshire elected a mayor for the first time. Now the race for electing the next South Yorkshire mayor is heating up as all of the candidates get ready for polling day on May the 5th. The mayor works with the leaders of the 4 local authorities across Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham and Sheffield, with the aim to drive the growth of the South Yorkshire economy. We thought that would be quite interesting for you to know a little bit more about, because that person is not the only mayor. There are others up and down the country. So we asked our Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley to get out and about on the story, and she's been speaking to voters in Sheffield to find out the issues that really matter to them.
Voters in Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham and Sheffield head to the polls on Thursday to elect the new mayor for South Yorkshire, who'll have the powers over economic schemes, transport services and infrastructure projects. Candidates from 6 different parties are looking to replace the incumbent Labour MP and Mayor Dan Jarvis, who announced that he would be stepping down as mayor earlier this year. We spoke to people in Sheffield to see what issues they want the new mayor to prioritise.
There's litter between front and ground, even when there's a bin nearby, so whoever it is, I just hope they can at least clean up Sheffield and keep it clean.
I think they need more, probably would say more independent shops, things like that. Maybe 1 or 2 pubs as well.
Better just parking for disabled and better routes for people to get around.
Transport, I think it's generally quite good here compared to other places, but it can always be better. I spend a lot of my time waiting for the train that is then delayed and broken and whatever.
A lot of people have said they don't come into town anymore because the buses don't stop where they want to be.
And that's it, so it's all in it.
And you need footfall to have a successful city centre.
So public transport, so for example like reliability of the buses. So you're waiting for the bus and it just doesn't turn up and then you end up being late to something because it doesn't come.
I know that's on petty, we used to get good Christmas decorations up, but I'm getting out a few little bits here and there and a Christmas tree and that's it. Rubbish.
So, the 3 issues important to people in Sheffield and South Yorkshire are cleaning up the streets, better transport links and improved retail facilities. And on shopping also, people said that they want to get rid of these boarded up shops. They want more investment put into the high street to increase that footfall and improve the local economy. So let's see what happens in these local elections. Anna Riley, GB News, Sheffield.
Anna Riley there, our Yorkshire reporter, and Humber as well. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've plenty more still to come in the last half hour, including Barbara Follett, former Labour MP for Stevenage from 1997 to 2010, and jointly founder of the Labour Women's Network. She'll be here live to discuss the state of Parliament and what it was like to be a woman then and what it might be like for women right now. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the latest news, and here is Olivia Guthrie.
Thank you. It's 25 minutes to 2. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB's newsroom. GB News can reveal hundreds of people on board multiple small boats have been intercepted by UK authorities in the English Channel this morning. It follows 11 days in which no small boats made it into British waters. Since first light, at least 7 vessels have been spotted and intercepted. At least 230 people have been taken to the UK Border Force's processing centre in Dover. It's reported an estimated 54 people who fled the steel plant in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol have arrived at a temporary accommodation centre in the Donetsk region. A source says buses of evacuees with Ukrainian number plates were in convoy with Russian troops and vehicles displaying United Nations symbols. It's as the Pope condemns Russia's attack on Mariupol, describing it as being barbarously bombarded and destroyed. A series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations involving MPs in Parliament has seen women working in Westminster share stories of men acting like animals. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is today calling for radical reform to make the House safer and more inclusive. It's after MP Neil Parish resigned after being caught watching pornography in the Commons. Interest rates are expected to be increased on Thursday to their highest level for 13 years. Economists predict the Bank of England will increase rates from 0.75% to 1%, a number not seen since early 2009. Members of the bank's Monetary Policy Committee have raised rates at each of its past 3 meetings as part of attempts to rein in record inflation. COVID guidance in Scotland has changed from today. Those with the virus no longer need to self-isolate, but are still being advised to stay at home. Contact tracing has also come to an end as case numbers continue to fall. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. It's 20 to 2 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio. From noon, we've been talking about women in politics during the show, and I'll be reading out some of your tweets at the very end. But I'm delighted to say that my final guest in that conversation is a very dear friend of mine, Barbara Follett. Barbara is formerly the Labour Member of Parliament for Stevenage and a groundbreaking campaigner to get more women into Parliament. She's also the former chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party Women's Committee and the co-founder of Labour Women's Network. Welcome, and thank you Thank you so much for coming in. When you and colleagues helped get over 100 women into Parliament, the Parliament that we're noting today, 1997, 25 years ago, not all of them were Labour by any means, but most of them were Labour women, and they were immediately dubbed Blair's babes.
I know.
Welcome to casual sexism.
Yes. You know, it didn't matter. At 52, I didn't mind being called a babe. I wasn't, but it was wonderful alliteration. We got 101 women out of the 120 women who were elected in 97 into Parliament. And that was by working together, by networking in the same way that the men had been doing, and by informing women. Because one of the ways in politics, if you want to make sure something's not going to happen, you keep people out of the loop. Very much same in news, I should think. But women were thoroughly out of the loop. And we made sure we got into the loop. And what I love about what's happening at the moment is that we've reached a critical mass. A quarter of MPs are now female. So if we had thought about complaining about the fact that when women stood up to speak in the House of Commons in 1997, I'm not going to demonstrate to you what some of the men did, or maybe I should, which is they would hold their chests and jiggle them to signify breasts. It was when that happened, if we complained about it, the whips would say, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen.
It's fascinating. I asked you whether you arrived here soon enough to hear our mutual friend Eleanor Goodman, one of the giants of political journalism, and I got into terrible trouble because she gave an example of an MP who used to run his hand down the back to see whether you're wearing a bra or not, and I muddled that up with Dennis Healey, who used to say, "Oh, hello, dear, how are you?" We're now talking today about Neil Parish and about a member of Parliament, not terribly high profile, watching pornography in the House of Commons. That's a hell of a journey.
Yes.
I mean, rubbing a hand down a woman's back is not on, it's offensive to many women, but there's a big difference.
But you know, when I got up to make my third intervention as an MP, when I sat down again, the person sitting next to me had purposely left their hand so that I would sit on it. And it happened again and again. So it's not so far off.
And by definition, a fellow Labour Member of Parliament.
I'm afraid so, yes. This was not confined. It is not confined to one party, I can assure you.
The thing that Eleanor Goodman said, and you were kind enough to confirm when you came in that you had been able to hear her conversation with Freddie and Sean, is to broaden it out from that, whether it's somebody putting their hand down when you sat down or whether it's a Member of Parliament looking at pornography in the House of Commons. Eleanor said it's corrosive for democracy and it's corrosive for Parliament.
I couldn't agree with her more, because what it shows is disrespect. And what we have been getting in the past, I would say, 2 years, is constant instances of disrespecting other people and disrespecting the electorate. The one thing about Neil Parish that I like is that he has admitted what he's done.
Eventually, to be fair.
But nobody at the minute even does it eventually. Yeah. They build up walls of lies, which is disrespectful.
Fascinating point. My first guest just after noon was the lovely Deanna Davidson, Tory MP for Bishop Auckland, and she does a programme running up to noon. And she said, I value integrity above anything else in politics. Sometimes it means holding your hand up and saying, I got that wrong, I'm sorry. I had a discussion with the Prime Minister about this and he didn't disagree with me. It's not just Tories.
No.
And I said to you earlier that when you've got the Angela Rayner case, and there are two issues with Angie, was it she who told the story about flashing her legs to try and put off the Prime Minister? Many of the newspapers say it was, not least Dan Hodges, who used to work for the Labour Party. And secondly, whether or not she was at a gathering in Durham. Initially, she wasn't, with Sir Keir Starmer and other colleagues up in the Durham constituency, and now she isn't. David Lammy having to apologise publicly on television today. So it's not just Tories, it's across the piece.
It's across the piece. And within Parliament itself, there's a feeling, when I got in there, I was surprised that people felt that parliamentary privilege, that thing that allows MPs to say things without being sued in the chamber, extended to their behaviour, and that they could do things with impunity. And you can't do that in the world. And you had a piece just before I came in about the things that are needed in Yorkshire, and somebody was complaining about litter. I see that. I think littering is disrespectful, and it goes right through our society. Why is it that places like Switzerland don't have litter? Why do we have it everywhere?
Sean Worth, who used to work for Dave Cameron, was saying, it goes back to Isabel Hardman's brilliant book about why do we get the MPs that we do. And he was suggesting that you might even want to take a step down the American road of better grilling of candidates and also of ministers. You know, if the Prime Minister wants to make you Secretary of State for X, Y or Z, you've got to pass a hearing, you've got to be grilled and questioned.
It would also help when you make a minister if you actually speak to that minister face to face and say what you want. Very often, because there's a huge swathe of people that come in, That doesn't happen. But the grilling, that's where Labour Women's Network was good. We would grill and we would ask what we call the agents questions. OK, is there anything in your life that you would hate to have come out? And people quite often forget about things. And then you either bring it out or you deal with it. But I think we need more honesty, integrity. I couldn't agree more, Alistair.
When you look at somebody like Deanna Davidson and the generation of women who've come into Parliament now, one other thing crossed my mind, because we're of a similar vintage and we remember those early days, and the Blair babes, if you like. Do you think that women generally in politics have become more emboldened? And is the flip side of that they've become slightly more sensitive? Oversensitive?
I think what has happened is that they now feel able to complain. Because if I'd complained, I'd have got short shrift. You can't take...
Never crossed your mind to go to the chief whip and say, when I sat down, some idiot had put his hand under my backside?
Not at all, because you had to be better than the boys. You had to take the boys on. And we did. And we sort of descended to their level every so often, just to fight them back. Now,
so not oversensitive, but they have found a nerve, a courage that perhaps they didn't have 25 years ago.
Also, when you go out and complain about almost anything, you get a lot of bad reaction as well as good. You just have to look at what happens to people in domestic violence cases. They don't want that. I don't want this publicity. And I think we have to make it possible for the complaints, and I very much welcome what Lindsay and Andrea are doing. They're working together. They're not saying this is one party. They're saying, let's have a look at how this building works. And incidentally, if I were they, I would also have a look at the building, which should be used for ceremonial purposes, and somewhere else should be used for the real work.
How interesting.
Well, I've always said, take them up to Leeds, that's the centre of England, and let them work in a building which is not rat-infested or mouse-infested, which it was when I was there, and where you're allowed to cable it. I was constantly told, this is a royal palace. You cannot have computer cables.
I find it intriguing that all of my guests, and it was Sean Worth from the Tory Central Office, and it was Freddie Gray from The Spectator, and Deanna and Eleanor, all of whom made that point, that it does potentially jeopardise our trust and faith in our politics. Now, am I being over-dramatic when I say that's the profound thing? If people just look at all of this stuff and say, come the May 5th elections or the general election as and when it comes round, do you know, I just can't be bothered because they're all as bad as one another. That is a profound problem.
That is totally profound, because you remove yourself from the democratic process. You remove your voice. You remove your influence. And you say, they're all the same, I'm not having anything to do with any of them. And then, of course, they can do what they like to you and to your family. And that has indeed been happening. You get terribly low turnouts across the world.
Sure.
We have rather higher ones, in fact. You also get good people not putting themselves forward.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier on Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, suggesting that it was time for a Speaker's Conference, but mainly to look about who employed whom and what those terms of references were, and the need for proper HR to look after, whether they're men or women. Is he right on that score?
He is completely right. What has happened is that over the years, a system has grown up which isn't regulated, and actually running, the average MP has about 5 staff. Running those staff, it's and looking after the HR side, it's a lot of work. I think it would probably be a better way with a central HR department, as long as you gave the MP the right to choose the staff.
Yeah. A final area of questioning, and it just struck me when I read it this morning in the Telegraph, and I knew I was going to be talking to you. Hey, surprise, surprise, the chairman of the Conservative Party, Oliver Dowden, who is a good bloke and a good man, saying that our plan is, ere long, to have 50% of Tory MPs women.
I read it this morning and said, you know what? We change things in 1997, and the change is still happening. I never thought in all my life that I would hear a Tory minister say that. It's going to be blooming hard to do because...
Oh, absolutely. And well, I've got a couple of supplementary questions on it. But Deanna Davidson, youngster, 2019 intake, behind the red wall, she doesn't want quotas. She wants to be the best candidate in front of the selection committee. She was one woman out of 3 candidates and they chose her.
I fought for all women shortlists because otherwise we'd have had to wait 200 years to get women up to 50%. But I never stood in an all-women shortlist because I thought, having fought for it, I must now show that I can do it on my own. So Stevenage was not an all-women shortlist. But we don't need them anymore. We had a sunset clause in the legislation we put through in 2002, which allowed the reintroduction of all women shortlists. And that sunset clause for Labour has been reached because more than 50% of the Parliamentary Labour Party is female. It's not the case with the Conservative Party.
Sure. OK. And my final question is this, and again, I put it to my other guests, it's about leadership, in my humble opinion, whether you're talking about the leader of the Conservative Party, the leader of the Liberal Democrats Party, or the leader of your own party, Sir Keir Starmer. If they were strong, powerful and totally respected figures, half of this stuff wouldn't be happening because people wouldn't dare.
Also, people would allow them some human error. But there's so much error going on. I'm banging them all collectively together, which is not fair. There's so much error going on that people are just complete. It's like a bad marriage at the moment with the Prime Minister. He's got very little rope left.
Would you not accept as well, because you're one of life's great impartial people, although you're a former Labour MP, but you have a very open mind on these matters. Sir Keir Starmer has admitted as well that maybe he's banged on a bit too much about Partygate, and what the people out there would really like to hear more about is what he would actually do if he formed a government. I mean, it's not a charge sheet just for one leader.
It isn't a charge sheet just for one leader, but some of the charges at the moment against Boris Johnson are far worse. I think banging on a bit too much, yes, we all are guilty of that on and off. And I'm glad Keir said it. People are. I mean, you and I wake up probably in the middle of the night. Nuclear war, shortage of food, cost of living, shortage of staffing, you know, in the care homes. We're in a terrible state. And what do we talk about?
Fascinating. Great to see you. Perfect witness on this conversation about women in Parliament and what they face and what they don't face. I don't think you've ever told me that story about sitting down only to find a hand, but goodness gracious me, that's way back when. Never. Do me one final favour, and that is give my regards to your lovely husband, and I hope that both of you will come back and see us again sometime soon. Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Very, very much indeed, Barbara Follett there. So that is all that we have time for this weekend. I hope very much indeed that you found it intriguing. Tried to get a really good balanced conversation, finishing up with former Labour MP Barbara Follett and starting with Deanna Davidson, my very good friend, who is, of course, a Conservative MP, plus good journalists in between, 2 men, and the great Eleanor Goodman. So food for thought. You can keep those tweets and those emails coming in. They're open the whole time. But that is all that we have time for today and indeed this weekend. But I will be back next weekend from midday. And of course, by then, we'll have had that small matter of the local elections. Much to reflect upon. But until then, from all of us here, a very good afternoon to you and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking cloudy and wet, particularly for central and western parts of England and Wales. Let's take a look at the details. In the southwest, it's been a mostly dry start to the day. However, some rain is sweeping in from the north, and this could be heavy at times, especially over the moors. Rain will continue to spread its way south-eastwards across London as well as we go through this afternoon. It should be mostly light here. After a very wet morning in Wales, the rain should start to ease as little as we head through the afternoon, though staying damp. Looking across northwest England, and here too, the worst of the rain will have come through this morning. That being said, there will be further outbreaks of rain to come and staying cloudy. In the northeast, there will be little change as we go through the afternoon, with quite a lot of cloud. As a result, temperatures will struggle, but